Welcome back, Trumpet Land, and thank you for joining me for my second installment of Learning Second Trumpet Excerpts. My name is Anthony Prisk, and I play second trumpet in the Philadelphia Orchestra. I also teach at the Peabody Institute and Temple University. For this video, I've chosen a couple of excerpts from Bartók's exciting ballet, The Miraculous Mandarin. These are a couple of my favorite excerpts to play in the orchestra, and a really fun piece all around. I believe that these second trumpet excerpts are asked for quite frequently in second trumpet auditions because they encompass many of the skills we need to play second trumpet well. Second trumpet players need to be adaptable to the different roles they play in the section. Vincent Chikowitz, the former second trumpet player of the Chicago Symphony, once said, "The first rule of playing second trumpet in an orchestra is to check your ego at the door." I think this is true for many, many excerpts. But when we have a solo, like in these excerpts, we need to let our ego shine a little bit, show some personality, and then morph back into the section in our more supportive roles. These excerpts show your ability to play unisons, to match articulation, to match rhythm, to match pitch, and to play duets in the same style and same rhythmic feel as the first trumpet player. These excerpts also exhibit your technical facility, your fingering dexterity, and your articulation abilities. So now we'll go over the tools that I like to use when preparing to play these excerpts in the orchestra or for auditions. Béla Bartók was a very influential Hungarian composer in the early 20th century. His Miraculous Mandarin was premiered in 1926 in Cologne, Germany. Unfortunately, the premiere was not very well received, and it was branded scandalous for its risque topics, maybe a little bit too much for the time. Due to the poor reception of the premiere, Bartók's ballet was most often performed as an orchestral suite, which is about 2/3 of the original ballet. The ballet tells a story of three tramps that utilize a young girl to lure in unsuspecting victims for their con for cash scheme. Things go a little haywire when she tries to seduce a Chinese man, the Miraculous Mandarin. Bartók utilizes pentatonic harmonies and melodies to emphasize this Asian theme of the ballet. The first excerpt we'll look at is one of the dances that the young girl performs for the Mandarin. It's like a deceitful waltz. The second excerpt is from the chase scene of the ballet. This is like rock and roll for the orchestra. It really grooves. So now let's look at each excerpt individually and get down to the nitty-gritty details. Okay, the first thing we need to work on in the first excerpt is the subdivision of the 16th notes and the relationships from bar to bar. So here's a couple exercises that I like to do to get familiar with the actual rhythm. And this is before I add the accelerandos and rallentandos. So let's subdivide first. We're going to subdivide to the lowest common denominator, which is more or less 16th notes. So I'm going to start with a slower tempo, and I'm going to articulate the subdivisions and play them very softly, and play them kind of in the style of the music. Now, did you see that I subdivided the big triplet with eighth note triplets? So this way, we're actually really learning the good subdivision here, and we'll be a lot more flexible when we're trying to follow somebody else. Work this up gradually and slowly. Once again, you're working it up very gradually. Here's the tempo, 96. Without the accelerando or rallentando. Now from there, we're going to add the molto accelerando and rallentando. This will be subjective based on the conductor and first player that you're playing with. So do your best to emulate these by listening to recordings and trying to follow recordings. So here's a little bit of an example of what I'll do. I'll still do with the metronome and do my accelerando and rallentando while the metronome's playing. So I end up at the same tempo at the 3/8 bar 4 before 52. Because the dotted quarter note equals 64 is 1/3 of 192, which is double of 96. Math. Another tricky spot here is the relationship between the 5/8 and the 3/4 bar 2 before 52. We need to understand the relationship between the dotted quarter and the quarter note. So in the 5/8 bar, we have 10 16th notes. And then in the 3/4 bar, we're actually going to have 6 16th notes per beat. So that way, we keep the 16th note steady. And then we'll fix the relationship of the 3 against 4 in the bar before 52. So here's an example of that very slowly with just one note. Now with the notes. So now in tempo, the 64, this is the 8th note at 192. Now we try to put it all together. I hope that helps. So now that we've worked out the subdivisions for the excerpt, it's time to start thinking about the sound we're going to make for it. In the context of the ballet, the clarinets give you an intro, and they have a stark kind of vibrato-less sound before you start playing. I like to match that sound a little bit in the beginning of this excerpt. Of course, you have to do what the first trumpet player does, but when you're playing this as an excerpt, you can go off what you feel is appropriate for this moment. We need to practice the marcato articulation in a mezzo piano with the mute in to understand the resistance of the instrument and the difference the mute makes. So I like to work on this excerpt without the 30 seconds first, and then add them in once I feel like I've got the right articulation. This method of taking things apart like this is what I like to call the cheeseburger analogy of practicing. We want to take all of the ingredients and prepare them really well, and then put them all back together again to make a delicious cheeseburger. It's the same thing in music. We want to tear apart all these elements and then put them back together again to make one complete product, one complete beautiful sound, or a juicy cheeseburger. I'll cover that in another video. So taking the 30 seconds out, I'm going to try to work on just the accents at a mezzo piano. And I try to do this without vibrato, like the clarinets that come before me. The 30-second notes are a little tricky. We need to really flicker those valves, which means the fingers need to be like little drummers. We can isolate the 30 seconds for the clarity of the notes. We want very even notes. And the way we're going to do this is really blow through the fingering and pound the vowels down in the right rhythm. As far as straight mutes are concerned, there are a lot of choices out there. If you're playing second trumpet, you do need to ask the principal what they want to use and try to use the same mute. I think it helps with the sound and intonation. But for myself, when playing this in an audition, I've chosen the Trump Corps copper bottom straight mute. This mute has a great sound in the louder dynamics and projects very well over the orchestra. It's clear, and the intonation isn't affected as much as some other mutes. This makes for good, quick mute changes. This mute also plays a little bit more free, so the low register stuff comes out a little bit louder. But this means that the lower dynamics don't buzz as much, so we need to work to get a very clear, buzzy sound in the mezzo-piano dynamics at the beginning of the first excerpt. Now that we're done working on the technical challenges of this excerpt, I'd like to play for you the second trumpet part by itself, and then in context with the first trumpet part, so you can hear them together. The second excerpt we're going to look at for this video comes from 3 measures before 67 to 71. This is what I like to call rock and roll for the orchestra, or the chase scene in the ballet. This is an awesome moment in Bartók's Miraculous Mandarin. It's a really fun thing to play, and it grooves really hard. So one of the things we need to work on is the syncopated rhythms that we have to play here. I like to work with a metronome to work on these rhythms and just to feel the offbeats a little bit better. You can use your own scale exercises or choose some of the exercises in the Arbon book from the syncopated rhythm section. So here's an exercise I like to do for the syncopated rhythms in the beginning of this excerpt. We're going to use a metronome and we're going to play an F harmonic minor scale. And I'm going to experiment with patterns, but here I'm going to play it slowly at first and then play it a little bit faster at the tempo of the excerpt. There are many different exercises you can do to work on syncopation, and it's important to explore them all. I like to make a distinction between the legato markings and the marcato markings in this excerpt. The legato markings should be a little bit longer and weighted, where the marcato markings should be a little more clearly articulated and punchy. Here's an example of the difference between the two. Marcato, legato marcato. Continue that distinction throughout the excerpt. Another one of the challenges in this excerpt are the difficult scale patterns that we have to play. These scales beg the use of alternate fingerings, or as one of my temple students used to say, we need to take a trip to alternate fingering city. So let's try a couple of different alternate fingering combinations that I've used over the years. First of which is this one. So I'm using C, D flat, E, G, A flat, G, E, D flat, C. combination we can use is C, D flat, E, G, A flat first valve, G, E, D flat, C. This. Or this. Whatever works best for you. Now that we've worked on the awkward scale, at rehearsal 68 we have those low A's. These can be a little tricky when it comes to how loud we need to play here. We also need to be able to crescendo on them. It's important to get a very centered, focused, and brilliant low note here. I want you to try some breath attacks on the low A to try to get the brilliance from the air and not from the tongue. This will also help you to feel where the resistance of the horn is with a mute in for the low A. Once you feel that center, add the tongue. As you're playing it, then crescendo to see where your limit is. Find that breaking point and then back off. Another thing we can do is use a drone and try to keep the pitch very consistent with the drone. Try playing a long tone with the drone, keeping the notes centered and relaxed. Listen for the intonation. Start adding articulation and making the note lengths shorter and shorter while retaining the same center and intonation. Now let's try playing the low A's in context with the drone, after playing the scales, matching intonation and center. It's important to go for a relaxed, loud sound here. Anytime you try to push those notes, they'll fight you back. The last thing we need to look at in this excerpt is the markatissimo at rehearsal 69. It's important to note that the tempo changes here from 132 to 120, so most conductors pull it back here a little bit. This section is in unison with the first trumpet player, so I recommend having a conversation with them about where they're going to breathe and whether or not they want to stagger the breaths or breathe together. I think it's also important to talk about fingerings here, or pay attention to the fingerings that they use. Sometimes when playing in unison, I like to glance over with my peripheral vision to see what fingerings the principal trumpet player is using. This gives me a better chance to match their sound and intonation. This part of the excerpt can be physically and mentally challenging to practice. So I like to do one thing at a time. Let's start with mental practice. Let's sing through these rhythms and fingerings and articulations to get a better handle on them before we start using our chops. So the first thing I like to do is sing the excerpt and finger it at the same time. I'm going to sing it with one vowel sound the whole way to keep the sound open and sustained. I'm also going to use one consonant sound. Here I'll probably use da. I'm going to finger the notes as I sing them, and I'm going to try to sing the correct articulations. I'm just going to do a little bit for you. Da, 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 da. Also sing it with a metronome. This is 120. Da 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 da. Start your mental practice as slowly as you need to. It'll give you a better chance of learning this and ingraining it in the right way. Now let's talk about physically practicing this excerpt. I like to incorporate the 4 S's into my practice: slow, soft, slurred, and sustained. As you get more comfortable with this excerpt, remove one of the S's at a time. Start adding a little speed, start adding a little volume, start adding some articulation, and start taking away some note length, if necessary. Another thing you can do with this excerpt is play it very slowly and slurred down an octave. So let's do a couple of those things right now. After we get comfortable playing it down an octave, try playing it up an octave in the same way. Allow yourself the opportunity to think clearly on this excerpt. Take it very slowly, work it up at your own pace, and do only a few clicks at a time. Go back and forth between mental practice and physical practice. That way you're giving yourself a lot of rest. Just like we did in the first excerpt, I think it's important to work on the subdivisions in this passage. That way we're not laid off the ties. Once again, slowly working your way up to the tempo. One last detail to look at the end of this excerpt is the eighth note passage before 71. There's an awkward lip slur here that I like to use Arbin slurring exercises to fix. Now that we're done working on the technical challenges of this excerpt, I'd like to play for you the second trumpet part by itself, and then in context with the first trumpet part, so you can hear them together. Thank you for watching my video about preparing the second trumpet excerpts from Bartók's Miraculous Mandarin. I hope you've gleaned some good information about how to practice these excerpts, and maybe you've put a couple new practice tools in your shed. I enjoy making these videos for you, so please subscribe to my page and join me for the next one. You can also find me at the Peabody Institute and Temple University. Have fun and good luck.